I'm Judy Stiles. Thank you for joining us this week on Newsmakers. Our topic this week is a serious one that we've heard about nationally and locally. Today we're looking at suicide prevention and awareness. Joining me, Debbie Fitzgerald and Stephen McCullough from the Ozark Center. Thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you for having us. It's a very important topic.
As I mentioned, this is a topic that we've heard about nationally and unfortunately locally, so I thought we'd share some information for our viewers to help educate and provide information today. And I guess when people say, well, I see the stories in the headlines, but can you put into perspective when we talk about suicide problem, the scope, maybe some statistics or numbers to show how immediate this is?
Oh, certainly. On planet Earth, we lose at least one human being, according to the World Health Organization, every 40 seconds. And in America, someone attempts suicide every 28 seconds. And as far as the number of citizens lost nationwide to suicide, the number is close to 45,000. And the majority of them are male and career or middle-aged individuals. However, anytime anyone of any age takes their life, it's certainly a tragedy, and those left behind are always questioning why.
Right, so it's not just the person, it's the families and people that know the people who are committing the suicide, having the suicide situation. What about when you look at locally? We'd like to know in the last year we've had some situations in the Joplin region, made some headlines. How are we doing in this part of the state?
Actually, in Jasper County, we've been in the top 10 counties for death rate by suicide since 2001. Missouri, we are actually trending in the wrong direction. We were at 17th out of the 50 states. This is the list that you don't want to be number one. Right. We want to be 50. We were 17th, and then we've moved up to number 14, going from 2015 to 2016 data.
So certainly you can raise a lot of eyebrows and people saying, wow, I didn't realize it was that big of a problem.
Oh, certainly. So essentially in America and in Southwest Missouri, we're losing more people to suicide. They're taking their own life than we are losing individuals to car accidents or drunk driving or homicide, and in the youth to cancer. And that to me is very sad, because it is a preventable cause of death if we can connect people who are in so much emotional pain to someone who's trained, who can help at the time. It can more than likely avert a tragedy.
I know sometimes people don't talk about it, and that's one of the things today we're talking about it, and the audience is listening. But do you find that perhaps, last year we had some of the quote celebrity suicides that made the big headlines? Is that suddenly people start talking a little bit more when they hear about the big names and the awareness?
Yeah, I think that it does two different things. It brings some awareness to it, and then people do start talking about it. But then it also, when we have a highly publicized suicide, we want to be careful, because a lot of times those are people that we look up to. For example, with Robin Williams, after he died, for a 3-month period, the suicide rate went up 10% nationwide.
Okay.
But if you think about it, he was the funny guy, and people looked up to him and thought that he had a great life, and they didn't understand or realize that he had this struggle.
Is that the big situation? People ask why.
Right.
And you're trying to answer that question. You said victims' families and people, why did this happen? Exactly.
And sometimes it's difficult for us to see that as outsiders, and so we really want to make sure that they understand that there's a number of things that are going on in somebody's life that may contribute to suicide risk.
I know locally we had some situations in the last year or so where we've had seemed like a larger number of at least known teenage suicides.
Yes, and as I mentioned, it is very sad, anyone of any age, but especially with our youth, because generally adults feel a need to protect them, and that's what we do as adults and parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles, is we try to support our youth, and particularly those in school settings or in helping professions. You feel like, I wish I would have known. I wish I could have done something. And that's the thing. I like to say that suicide, unfortunately, is kind of sneaky. It doesn't have just one warning sign or one thing that you can say, yes, if this person has this, such as severe depression, they're going to attempt suicide and possibly die. It's not that easy because, as Stephen mentioned, it's usually multifaceted and things kind of layer up, and it builds for a period, research shows, for about 3 weeks from start to finish. And there's a matter of hours or a day where someone is at highest risk. So if we can possibly recognize some of those warning signs and connect them to someone who can help at the time, then they can survive it. That's the good news. If we can support people, a suicide crisis is definitely a symptom of emotional suffering. And if we can just help get them through that with support, then they usually go on to live a long and healthy life. In fact, most people who attempt suicide and survive it, which we're glad that they do not go on to attempt again, most generally.
Okay. So that's kind of a real bump in the, as I said, bump in the road. It's a major mountain roadblock. They have to overcome that hurdle to deal with that.
Yeah.
And that's what they're facing. Well, I know there's a lot of resources, and of course you're with the, with the Ozark Center. You're one of the key, I say, players, organizations. We had, after last year, the situations with the schools. It seems like you heard more school boards and organizations that deal with youth starting to talk about, what are we going to do?
Absolutely, and we have a saying that we need to break the code of silence in our community. We recovered from the disaster pretty well. And I think we can do it again in our community and just tighten the safety nets and start breaking that code of silence and having a frank, open discussion, and so that it's kind of brought out of the closet. It's still, I feel like it has a lot of shame and stigma.
Well, and I agree with that because with parents, they try to shield their children. They try to protect us as much as possible, and part of that holds us back from asking questions that we should be having asked to us and having those conversations. A lot of times, one of the biggest myths that we deal with is that if I ask about suicide, I'm going to plant the idea, and that isn't the case. And talking about suicide reduces the risk of somebody acting impulsively.
Okay, so that whole change of mind for the society, opening up and discussing. For so many years, you say it was hush hush. If someone, died from suicide, people didn't mention it. They're just, they whisper behind the scenes, whispering. Did you hear what happened to John Doe? And that was it. Yeah.
Yes, and I think it makes us just as human beings. It makes us uncomfortable. Even those of us that are trained. When you hear that somebody is contemplating taking their life, it's a very hard discussion to have, and sometimes people don't know where to go. They don't know who to tell, or families, if they've not seen depression before or seen, severe anxiety or a mood disorder, or nobody else in the family has had substance abuse or chronic medical problems. They may just not recognize it. So part of it is we just don't recognize it, the shame and stigma from seeking services, and then not just knowing where do you go or what do you do.
It sounds like it really ties into the whole issue of mental health being talked about a lot more in society than in the past. Seems to be a lot more emphasis now on focus on mental health.
Oh yeah, I would agree, and I'm hoping that eventually that we start looking at mental health as a yearly occurrence. So when people are going in for their physical health checkups, that they get checked up for depression and mental health as well.
So when you go in and you get your heart and your lungs and everything checked out at your checkout, exactly. You need to find out how are you feeling, how are you doing mentally as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. When we talk about those that, we call them suicide survivors, those that are left behind. It can be family, friends, coworkers, classmates, someone that you attended church or served on a board with, because suicide knows no boundaries. It takes people of all ages, of all races, of all economic backgrounds, and so it spares no group. And research shows that for every person who dies by suicide, so in America, nearly 45,000 individuals in the year 2016, anywhere from 6 to 15 other individuals, those left behind, the suicide survivors, are going to have what we call a life disruption. And what Stephen and I mean by that is that they are not going to be able to attend to school or do their best at work, or they may not be able to eat. They may have nausea. They may have nightmares. They may have periods of tearfulness. And so we need to support them through their grief process as well. But definitely it doesn't just happen in a vacuum.
Right. That's affecting society.
Right.
People making that contribution, working together.
And that extra support is necessary with somebody who has had a close member of their family or a close friend that dies by suicide, because it does increase their risk.
Is it hard sometimes for those people to ask for support or help? That they, is there a stigma that they're kind of embarrassed that somebody they know did this?
Yeah, a lot of times they're afraid to talk about it. They're afraid to ask. Sometimes people even avoid them because they feel awkward. They don't know what to say. They don't know how to support them and encourage them. And so, what we're hoping is that we can get to a point where we can talk about things a little bit more openly and fuel some of that conversation and help people be more comfortable.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit about the awareness, or, you mentioned there's no single cause. You can't say they did this because A caused B,
Right.
So, when we talk about the awareness side of, suicide or people that might be facing these challenges, what are things that people need to be aware of? What we're really talking about?
Well, certainly any drastic changes in behavior, anything that is extreme from here to here. Certainly if it's youth or someone that's in college and you're having academic slumps, you're having difficulties, how would I say it, maybe regulating yourself, like your sleep or your routine. You notice a decline in grooming. They're talking about, my family would be better off without me. Who cares if I'm dead anyway?
So there's some outward verbalization.
Right. You might have some mood swings. You might have some withdrawing from friends, family, not participating in activities that they generally find pleasure in.
Things that they used to like to do.
Exactly. And so a lot of those things where they start pulling away from their support systems and from those activities, we really start finding things that we have warning signs with. And then we just, it's kind of just adding them up. The more that you see, the greater the risk. We want to then look at what we need to do to support the individual and if they're at risk.
And is there ever, an instance where there really is no diagnosis prior to? You mentioned people that may have anxiety, depression, that they've never sought help for anything else before.
Oh, absolutely. There are many people that have no clear warning signs that were observed. They didn't make any statements. They say about 15% of suicide deaths are pretty impulsive. And unfortunately, it seems like youth kind of tend to be in that category. So there are many individuals that there is no previous mental health care or treatment. So then it becomes a question of, was it situational stressors? Or did they just have an undiagnosed behavioral health or mental health condition that just they didn't recognize, friends, family, or maybe even didn't address it with a primary care physician, and it just kind of went under the radar. But what we do know is the majority of people who die by suicide, research has shown that the majority of them are suffering from clinical depression, possible substance use or abuse, and significant losses, significant loss in their life, which is very individual. The thing is, it's so individual.
So a loss to someone, whether it's a loss of another family member or loss of a job or something like that, could be interpreted a lot of different ways.
And substance use is a really major factor, particularly alcohol use. Because if you think about it, most of the time we're talking about depression, and alcohol is a natural depressant. It pulls your mood down even further. It also makes you more impulsive, and it creates that lack of judgment that we see. And so that really puts the individual at risk. If they are at risk for suicide, it puts them at a higher risk. We see that 50 to 56% of people that die by suicide have drugs or alcohol on board, most oftentimes alcohol.
So it's mentally impairing their ability to think things out.
Right, yeah. Very, very dangerous situation. And certainly people want to feel better. So very often they want to escape the pain of living, and it's very individualized, and they may not have given off any warning signs. And we want to find a reason and be able to say, this is what it is. Because if somebody passes from a car accident or cancer, we know exactly.
The doctor can say this caused it.
Yes. And so with this, it makes it so difficult, and that's what makes this bereavement so painful. And people often that were in their life or their social settings feel responsible or guilt, and we would like to say, they shouldn't feel guilty about it. And unfortunately, I think that keeps some people from getting the support that they need. I certainly hope in my lifetime that it is a topic that is no longer taboo, and that people realize that treatment works. And treatment is not always being hospitalized. In fact, sometimes that's the worst place someone can be that's having a real
That might be a
struggle.
question people have. So someone has a problem, a challenge, what sort of treatment steps can be taken?
Well, there's a variety of treatment steps. What we'd like to see, particularly with us, is that if somebody's seeking out help earlier, before it gets to the point where they have so many things going on, we have a number of options. We could be looking at some counseling. We could be looking at medication management if the counseling doesn't work. The hospitalization, like she said, can sometimes be the worst place for them to go.
Because of the stresses that come with that and
Correct.
the unknowns of being in a medical situation oftentimes.
Exactly. It's a scary thought for a lot of people. But the good thing is that most people can be helped with an outpatient visit to counseling or medications, depending on what their need is.
Now, some people might wonder, well, I have medical insurance, and if I break my arm, I'll go to the doctor, the insurance will cover it. So some people might be worried, well, what's going to cover mental, illnesses and those types of things? So there's some questions perhaps in society of, what's that going to cost?
Well, and certainly sometimes if people are not really willing to take the step to talk to someone, they can certainly text or email. We have a Text About It program where you can email or text a crisis counselor 24 hours a day, 7 days a week by just registering and then anonymously texting. So you could reach out that way. Sometimes, especially youth, like
everything's texting, right?
Social media. And so that's a good possible first step for folks. Certainly we have crisis hotlines nationally and here locally. And we have counseling staff that are qualified mental health professionals. Many are licensed professional counselors or clinical social workers who can see someone anytime, any day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, even on holidays, completely free of charge. So there's no reason for someone to fear that I can't afford it. And not everyone that comes to the crisis center becomes a patient. You can come and seek support, and sometimes that's what people need, is to bounce off a plan, how to cope better, and walk away from just simply talking to someone for an hour or two and has a plan to go forward, and that is it. And then other times we recommend case management, therapy, as Stephen's mentioned.
And we work with a number of different providers. So if they come to our crisis team and they get assessed and they have particular insurance, we work with providers that work with different insurance companies. We make referrals to Christian counselors, whatever is the best fit for them.
So you individualize things for people. There's no one, this is what you need to do, prescription, go do it.
Right, because nothing works best when you have a cookie cutter. You have to really make sure that you figure out what is the best option for them at the time.
Now, do you find that people who are facing crisis and they're contemplating suicide, that they're just sometimes looking just for someone to talk to in their world or their sphere of living? There's nobody who will they say nobody's listening to me or something like that.
Yeah, and I think it's that those we're closest to. Sometimes we don't want to disappoint them, and we don't want to share that with them, and we feel like we shouldn't feel that way. I think most people that are suicidal think I shouldn't be feeling this way.
So they're feeling guilty about feeling that way.
Right. And so sometimes it's easier to bounce things off anonymously and confidentially to someone that you don't know, that you are aware of, has resources and trained. And so, yeah, I think that's really key. However, we certainly encourage family support and helping have conversations with family to keep you safe if you are really struggling, and we can set up a safety plan and do some education and things to put into place to keep that individual really safe.
Yeah, and I think a common misconception that prevents people from really reaching out to their family is they believe that nobody's going to understand. That's because they don't quite understand what's going on sometimes. And so it really holds them back from reaching out for help. And a lot of times, part of what we do bringing in families is we help educate and we help them to understand what the person who's having the crisis might need at the time, and better ways that they can support them. Because it isn't the families don't want to, it's sometimes they don't know what to give them.
They're overwhelmed of what do I do? Right.
Absolutely.
So the education aspect. You talk about the education aspect, talk about community education as well as part of getting the word out into the community. I know you do presentations to organizations. What are some of the ideas or ways that you can make it more something that people will talk about, that it's not something you just have to go to the special training session that somebody's offering?
Yeah, we do quite a bit of education because we want to change everyone's conception about suicide. We want to educate them on ways that they could recognize the warning signs and help engage somebody that's struggling. And we have trainings that are for adults and for children.
Oh, okay.
So for adults, we teach QPR. It stands for Question, Persuade, and Refer, 3 simple steps to save a life. It's modeled on like CPR. That used to be 3 steps. And so you learn how to question someone if they're suicidal, persuade them to seek help, and then know where to refer them. That training can be done with any high school age above. You do not have to have a background in mental health or social services, and it takes about an hour to an hour and a half depending on the needs. We're happy to go to agencies, faith-based groups, colleges, literally healthcare facilities, anyone that would like us to come that is in the 4-county area of Barton, Jasper, Newton, and McDonald. We would be happy to set up a training, or if they are outside that area, they can contact us and they can set in on a training we have in Joplin.
They can come here.
And they walk away with national and local resources and tools that they learn in about an hour, that then they can be a suicide prevention gatekeeper and they can intervene. And then
with the children, we have a program called Signs of Suicide, and we teach them those warning signs, and we work off of an acronym, which is acknowledge, care, and tell. So acknowledge that their friend is having a problem, and it could be serious. Let them know that they care about them and that they're concerned. And then T is for telling a trusted adult, because what we know is that they usually will tell a friend or somebody that is safe. And then we have to train those kids to bring in a trusted adult to help them with that situation.
Right, so you got to take that next step to someone a little older that can help them find those resources.
So we go to private schools, public schools. We'll be happy to go to any youth group, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, quite literally anyone that's willing to do it. We would be willing to pilot the program if somebody wants to see it before we come. But I want to stress that all of the crisis services and all of the trainings that we offer, or public speaking, is completely free of charge. And so we are able to tailor whatever the community entities' needs are at the time, but really wanting to break the code of silence. And I really want us to be a suicide safer community, and for us to be able to drive our rates down. It saddens me greatly working in crisis services, and when I see that we've lost another community member, it really, saddens me. And I think about their friends and their family, and then, the emotional turmoil that they may have been experiencing, that they chose to escape the pain instead of, staying here. And so suicide is preventable if we can connect people.
So really, I think you've heard the term, you're being proactive and not sort of reactive. Instead of waiting for something to happen and say, what do we do now?
Right.
Put it up in the forefront to discuss now and stop it before it becomes a problem.
Right.
For people.
And part of that is just talking about it and reducing the shame and stigma associated with mental health and reaching out for help.
So as people are watching, they probably want to know, how can they contact you? I know you have some numbers. I mean, you brought a lot of flyers information in here.
Yes, we did. So our crisis local number, we have a website, Ozark Center. .com or freemanhealthcenter.com, and you can click on the Ozark Center Crisis Services, and it has our phone number. We have a toll-free number. We also have a local number. There are also the National Suicide Lifeline if somebody does not want to call locally, although I would tell everyone that it is strictly confidential, and so they don't have to fear being outed if they call. And then also registering to be able to email or text someone is also on the website, and we have some pamphlets and brochures for that. And once again, we're there every day, all day long. We get hundreds and hundreds of phone calls a month, and we get thousands of phone calls and text messages a year, and we are happy, willing, and able to help.
So you're encouraging that, even though.
Absolutely.
Are you seeing an increase in the numbers? I mean, has there been a trend where more people are willing to call in?
We see it kind of ebbs and flows, but we do see increases during certain times and seasons, and so we kind of monitor that, and we try to staff accordingly to make sure that we have plenty of people available.
And I always hear about the stress of the holiday seasons. Is there a correlation between certain times of the year when you see more people facing these crisis moments?
Well, actually, the holiday season is kind of a lower time. It doesn't mean that people wouldn't die by suicide or any time of the year or day of the week, but we tend to see that the rates are highest in spring, moving into early summer. But if you think about the way that depression runs, that goes with coming out of that depression. And that's when we start worrying about that, because they get a burst of energy, and if they're thinking about suicide, they're at highest risk at that point.
Right. And those are the types of things for people to be aware of, to let them know, to watch for things and so forth. Well, I'd like to thank both of you for coming today and sharing some information for the audience, and as we, as I say, start opening the dialogue for the community, letting them know what's being done.
Well,
thank you for having us.
You're welcome. And I'd like to thank you, the viewers, for joining us this week. I'm Judy Stiles. Hope you can join me again next week at the same time on this station. We'll see you then.